captive in this very simplistic two-party perspective that they offer to people. But there is far, far more to this. We're going to talk about the history of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And, of course, you cannot talk about the history of the Trans-Pacific Partnership without talking about Bilderberg. Alex Jones is going to break that down in the next segment. He's going to give us some background on it. Of course, we have reporters who are traveling now on their way to Bilderberg. Coming up this next week, we have Paul Joseph Watson, Rob Dew, Josh Owens, are all going to be in Austria this next week covering the Bilderberg Group, something that for many decades they pretended did not even exist. Well into the 90s, if you talked about Bilderberg, you were laughed at as being a conspiracy theorist. We now know that Bilderberg, going back to its very beginning, the very first few meetings, they were working on creating a European Union and a euro currency. That's the way they move to global governance, is through this gradual process that is going on there. Now we're in the later stages of consolidation. Some of these organizations have been exposed. We're going to be following who is showing up at the Bilderberg conference. But of course, right now, in Austria, not too far from where the Bilderberg conference is going to be held, they have the G7 meetings going on. And the people that are there are very concerned about the transatlantic partnership, the TTIP. The protesters at the G7 summit in Garmisch, Austria, in Bavaria, are upset about what they see as being a sellout, rightfully so, a sellout of sovereignty. Here's some of the quotes. This is a story on The Guardian by Charlie Skelton. Of course, he is the one who covers Bilderberg for The Guardian. We saw him there last year in Copenhagen. A very good writer. This is what he says. He says, a helicopter came and hovered directly over us for about 5 minutes, presumably because they thought someone on the march had brought along a thermonuclear device. He says, they're talking about this being the largest police operation in the history of Bavaria. He said it was too loud to speak. He said there were so many helicopters hovering over us right now. He says, I keep expecting to hear Ride of the Valkyries, referring to Apocalypse Now. I don't know exactly what they're all doing up there. Hope they're trying to avoid each other. And then he quotes a journalist from Der Spiegel, says that it is the largest police operation in the history of Bavaria. And he goes on to say, such a huge display of power like this, I'm afraid people feel that it's a provocation. Precisely. That's exactly what it is when they put up a massive police presence. So if you look at that picture on there, if you pull that picture up for the article, you can see a few protesters flanked by an army of cops escorting them as they're marching. And so Skelton goes on and says, it feels a bit weird. There could not actually be any more police in Garmisch than there are right now. There wouldn't be room. He says there's traffic jams of police vehicles. Every spare inch of tarmac has been commandeered for police coaches, riot vans, operations trucks. The only cars on the road that aren't police cars are being driven by plainclothes policemen. And he goes on to say it's a show of political power. This is a 16-year-old student who is wide awake. He said this is a show of political power, but it is also a suppression of political protest. People have been stopped at checkpoints for so long, for hours at a time, that it's really difficult simply to show up here. But that's all that we can do in this situation, is to show up. Essentially, that's what Bilderberg is about. We can't get into the meetings. They hide it. They keep it in secret, just like they do the G7. Unlike the G7, where you've got heads of state meeting, we have heads of state, we have corporations meeting, we have intelligence agencies meeting in Bilderberg like they have for decades. And, of course, we're not allowed to see what happens there. The best we can do is try to ascertain who is there. In the last year or so, they have published an agenda, but we don't know if that's true. We have no way to verify that. We just have to take their word for it. But then Skelton goes on to ask in his article, he says, but what made this 16-year-old show up today? And the 16-year-old said, it's the TTIP. That's the European version, the Transatlantic Partnership. He says, this was the word that was on everyone's lips, everyone's placards, both young and old. The hikers were from across the political spectrum, from anarcho-syndicalists and libertarians through the Greens to the communists. But everybody was concerned about the TTIP trade deal. It seemed to be the one issue that gave focus to this vast ideological sprawl. And so then he talked to a guy now. First he talks to a 16-year-old. Then he talks to a 61-year-old. And he says, the 61-year-old says, they are global companies with global power. But today we're told over and over again that globalism is good. Yeah, it's good for a few. Yes, it is very good for those very few, he chuckled. To call yourself a globalist, you would have to be either very stupid or very, very rich. Or perhaps you'd have to be very apathetic. You know, as we look at some of the stories that came up towards the end of the week last week, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, when I look at what happened with the Gaia Democratic School, where they took some very young children to a pornography shop on a field trip, it reminded me of Brave New World. And I think the real key that we see here, certainly in this particular case that's going on with the G7 right now, I think the vast majority of the population is subdued by a kind of Brave New World approach. Something that comes at them and essentially celebrates promiscuity, makes a virtue of it, that distracts people, that says you can have all the sex that you want, but you can't have a family. We don't want parents. And that's the society that we're moving to. It's not something that started with Brave New World. Of course, it goes back all the way to Plato's Republic. That was the formula that he had for control. But I think that the vast majority of the public is distracted by this pleasure, by the drugs, by the sex that we are offered. And so they're not paying attention. The few people who do pay attention, like this 16-year-old, like the 61-year-old, who understand exactly what's going on with this Trans-Pacific Partnership, those who understand, who show up, what do they get? They get the 1984 treatment. And so our government has to exercise 1984 surveillance on all of us to determine who's going to get the fist, the iron fist, the boot stomping in their face. Stay with us. When we come right back, Alex Jones is going to break down Bilderberg for you. We'll be right back.
Ladies and gentlemen, Alex Jones here with a special announcement for all Infowars.com viewers and readers. Bilderberg 2015 is going to be one of the most important Bilderberg events that's ever been covered by the press. It is the Bilderberg Group that represents the global corporate fascist shadow government that is establishing a planetary regime right now. They're behind the EU in their own annals. They're behind the North American Union and now the Asian Union, known as the TPP. They don't want to be identified. They don't want press coverage. Until 10 years ago, the media wouldn't even admit they existed. But alternative media, the people's media, you, the viewers of this show and others, helped expose it. It's so exciting. And now there's a real debate about TPP. Now there is a real debate about these shadow groups and organizations. Now people are saying, what do you mean there's global treaties that are secret, that curtail the internet freedom and have global carbon taxes and erase national sovereignty and set laws for our Congress and parliaments? That's why they always denied corporate global government, because the minute it's exposed and the minute we begin to discuss it, it begins to implode. In fact, look at two articles that just came out in the BBC and Associated Press. There's hundreds of others where the UKIP party, that's basically a Ron Paul, Patriot, Alex Jones party in Europe and England with Lord Monckton and Nigel Farage, has forced the Tory party to say we're going to move to get out of the EU if they don't let the UK make its own laws. England never got to vote. The UK never got to vote to be part of the euro. They just called it a trade deal like the TPP, like NAFTA, like GATT. So these are very exciting developments. Bilderberg doesn't want to be covered. Normally, they only shut the hotel down a day before when they have it in different parts of the world. This time, it's shut down a whole week before. And Rob Dew, Paul Watson, Josh Owens, they're all going to be there Sunday through the Sunday afterwards, coming up from the 8th, that Monday, right through Bilderberg, covering it live on the ground for us. The police and military and others are shaking people down, grabbing their IDs. They're already harassing hikers and skiers. This is already going on because the Bilderberg Group is scared. Royalty, world leaders, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, the heads of Google, Microsoft, the Defense Department, prime ministers, they're all going to be there with Henry Kissinger and others. And they just hoped we'd all go to sleep and not know what they were doing. We're going to be there exposing it and pointing out that this is exactly the very type of organization and group that is staying in the shadows so they can engineer things like the TPP. Are there other globalist organizations? Yes, but they're all chaired and run by the very same 150 Bilderberg Group members and their guests. And so we're focusing in on what the dinosaur corporate media hopes you won't look at, hopes you won't investigate, because sunshine will destroy these political vampires. So join us at Infowars.com/show, where the radio show and TV show weekdays is free streaming. Also, we're going to have the nightly news free, not just for subscribers, all next week for 7 days straight, because we'll also have reporting on Saturday. It starts the 8th, and it runs right through for 7 days. We'll see if they try to stop our reporters even getting into Austria. That's happened before in England. It's happened in Canada. Reporters have been shot at in places like Lisbon, Portugal. I mean, this is a big deal. This is Spectre. This is Hydra. These are the bad guys that are behind the derivatives, the central banks, the wars, the funding of ISIS. These crooks do not want you watching. So get the free link at Infowars.com/show that we'll put below us here on this video and story, and send it out to friends and family. Post it on Facebook. Send it out on Twitter. Sign off on your emails with it and be part of the info war, because you, the viewers, don't stand in front of us or beside us or behind us. You stand at the heart of the human awakening worldwide, whether you be black, white, old, young, from Germany, from China, from Mexico, from Canada, from the United States, from Austria, from South Africa, or from Libya. It doesn't matter. Humans want freedom. We want a level playing field, and we're exposing the global corporate robber baron kingpins. So hammer this info out, and hundreds of millions more worldwide will learn the truth about who really governs the planet. If we just look at the politicians and frontmen, they'll just replace them like deck chairs on the Titanic. We have to look at who is pulling the strings, who's orchestrating it, and who's controlling it. All right, well, that's it for this special emergency transmission. You are the modern Paul Revere's. Get this information out to everybody you know, and we are literally going to see the fall of Bilderberg, the fall of EU, the fall of this global tyranny, right as they try to launch it off the ground. Because this is the point where the tyranny emerges when the world government is announced, after all the denial. They're trying to bring down freedom, shut down web freedom right now. Now is the time to expose them. They're at their weakest right as they spread their wings. I'm Alex Jones signing off. And never forget, if you're watching this transmission, you are the resistance.
All right, and as Alex Jones just pointed out, we're going to be sending reporters Paul Joseph Watson, Rob Dew, and Josh Owens to Bilderberg. They're on their way right now. We're going to have a report, an update from Rob Dew in the next segment, giving us an update at the airport, how things are going, because we typically run into a lot of just maybe coincidental travel problems when we go to Bilderberg, it seems like. We had more than our share of them last year with things being canceled on us, car reservations and so forth. Very strange. But anyway, we're going to have a report from Rob Dew at the airport. Support us this next week. We're going to be, as Alex Jones pointed out, broadcasting the nightly news live. That's normally a subscription service. We do make it available the day after on YouTube. You can see it with YouTube subscriptions. But if you subscribe to Prison Planet and support us with your paid subscription there, that's something you can share with 20 people each night. But this week, it's going to be available for free. So it costs a lot of money for that bandwidth. It also costs a lot of money to send these reporters there. Support us in this effort. If you're not going to get a subscription, support your health at InfoWarsLife.com. We have a special this week. It's 25% off. Save $10 a bottle on Survival Shield X2. Now, of course, with everything that's going on, you need a few drops of this just to get a powerful dose of a key essential nutrient, iodine. And, of course, it's in one of the best forms you can find the iodine, nascent iodine. And our X2 iodine comes from thousands of feet within the earth. We run radiation tests before we even accept the pure raw iodine. It's now time to get prepared to have something in your medicine closet for yourself as well as for your everyday health as a supplement. Survival Shield X2 from InfoWars Life. I take it every day. My family takes it every day. Secure yours at InfoWarsLife.com. Now, as Alex was pointing out with Bilderberg, we're going to take a look, as I said, in the next segment, we're going to have an update from Rob Dew as to the travel arrangements, as to what's going on with them. But I want to take a look also at the origin and the history of Bilderberg. You know, last year marked the 60th anniversary of the first meeting of the Bilderberg Group. This year marks the 60th anniversary of their plans to create the European Union and the euro currency. That's very important. If we go back and look at an article that came out in 2000,